Howdy everybody, welcome back to the channel. The main event here. The robe is back and so are we. We are going to be talking about the Los Angeles Regional Championships. A tournament that was won by Montana piloting Calyrex-Shadow. Not only did Calyrex-Shadow win this event, but it did very well overall. As you can see, we even have 2 in the top 8. Which brings us to the question today: was Calyrex-Shadow a fluke, or was it just a matter of time that this Pokemon started to dominate events? So we're going to look at Montana's team first, just to see if there's anything like special about the team. I think this is the 6th that Wolf used to win one of the early Reg G tournaments. So it's not surprising that it did well, but obviously it's going to come to a shock to some people that it won this event because it hasn't been placing, right? This event had 2 Calyrex-Shadow in the top 8. A lot of events just found out was not having any Calyrex-Shadows in the top 8. So I didn't see a lot of the sets on stream, but usually when you have like a Clefairy in a Calyrex-Shadow, you actually have a little bit of bulk invested so that you can survive hits and take advantage of the friend guard. Spell tag is a boosting item instead of the instead of the life orb is interesting. I think it makes sense though, right? Because you kind of can't afford to sacrifice HP on this Pokemon all the time, which is why a lot of people run Specs or Sash, just to get max damage or to get survivability. Because again, sometimes losing the health from life orb is just not always optimal. And with Nasty Plot, Terra Fairy is the defensive typing, and then the friend guard for redirection. I think spell tag is kind of fine. That's all you need, right? So I kind of like that. I like spell tag. I used to use spell tag back in Sword and Shield with like Astral Barrage and Shadow Ball, just because I didn't want to get blocked by Wygard all the time. So I think spell tag is a good call. Rillaboom is very standard. Instant is pretty standard. I guess Taunt is something that's picking up a little bit more. Instant, Taunt, and Wisp over like Flare Blitz. Taunt probably be the most uncommon of the 3. Urshifu is very standard. Tornadus is very standard. Clefairy is grass to protect from the the Abungus, most likely to redirect spores. Also to help you with Urshifu Water. Urshifu Water with like Choice Scarf is a bit of a problem for Calyrex-Shadow, especially with Terra Water Surging Strike. And also like no Psychic move on here. So this helps with Mungus and Urshifu because grass will just redirect and eat those hits. So that's really, really good. Good team, strong team, very standard team. Also want to look at the other top 8 team because it has some differences. From Adi. Adi did really well in this tournament. I think he started off 9-0 through day 1. Well, day 1, because the tournament day 1 Swiss ended up going into day 2 because of timing delays. It was really, really scuffed. So same Urshifu. His Incineroar has Will-O-Wisp instead of Taunt. This Calyrex-Shadow has Calm Mind instead of Draining Kiss. And it has the Clover Cloak, which I want to get into a little bit later because I think I have an idea maybe why people are using Clover Cloak over Clear Amulet on this mod, but I'll get into that when I look at the top 256 stuff. So Calyrex-Shadow, Draining Kiss, Astral Barrage, Calm Mind over Nasty Plot for, I guess, defensive boost, which also takes advantage of the Clefairy as well. So I think Calm Mind makes sense. I think whenever a Pokemon has Calm Mind and Nasty Plot, most of the times I think I prefer Plot on there. But depending on how you train it, now Calm Mind could be better. This has Raging Bolt over the Tornadus for the speed control for Electro Whip instead of Tailwind. Obviously not as immediate, but Raging Bolt has way more survivability and generally way more damage output. Plus it has priority attacks versus not just priority like Taunt or something. So I could see why the Raging Bolt would be a choice over the Tornadus. This is a banded Rillaboom. Something I've seen a little bit of, not that much because it's just not that easy for people to pilot because there's no fake out. But U-turn high horsepower Grassy Glide would hammer Choice Band Terra Grass. Like that's gonna do a lot of damage and things. So I can see why this team did very, very well because the team looks very, very strong. It looks hard to get rid of. It looks like it does really good damage. So I definitely understand. All right, so now I want to look at the usage stats for day 1. Also might get some insight into why Cali did so well. So top use restricted, Mireidon jumped up to number 1. It jumped up to number 1. Not surprising because flavor of the month, right? It's been doing so well. People have learned how much damage it does. People were disrespecting it before. People are not disrespecting it now. So seeing it be the top used Pokemon in day 1 does make a lot of sense to me. Calyrex-Shadow is always going to be in the top 3 or 4. Terrapagos is always going to be high. Zamazenta is climbing. Obviously people have been using Zamazenta a ton, but I think it hovers around maybe the 4 to 6 range versus like being like top 3 all the time. I can't remember what the last regional had, but top 4 kind of makes sense. Calyrex-Shadow drops all the way to 5th, something that's usually in the top 3. Drops all, actually 6th. I'm trolling. It dropped all the way to 6th behind Mireidon. Mireidon's been, people still believe in Mireidon because obviously it's a very, very strong Pokemon and Sun is still very, very strong. Mireidon and Kyogre rounding out the top 8 is interesting. Sometimes Groudon tends to fall in and out of this top 8 spot. Kyger is going to probably have a good handle on one of these lower spots here as well. It's just a very, very consistent damage dealer when you have it in the right spots. Day one of the top 12 Pokemon. Ensign, Rillaboom. So basically the top 6 that I've said is always going to be top 6 minus the Amoonguss. Sometimes the Tornadus falls out for Amoonguss. Sometimes the Fluttermane is in there occasionally. But sometimes usually it's these 4, Raging Bolt and Amoonguss, and the Fluttermane's usually like 6th. But I think Fluttermane moving into this spot makes a lot of sense because it just does a lot of things well. One, consistent damage in something like Zamazenta, which people are having trouble doing damage into. Good matchup with Terrabogos because Terrabogos can't hit it until it terastallizes pretty much. So if you can force a Terra out of Terrabogos, you can actually damage into it. You can also wall it off for like wide guard stuff. So it makes sense that Fluttermane is doing really well. It's good into Mireidon as well. It's good into Mireidon because it has speed booster, so you can always hit it before it goes. And you have a nice special defense stat, so you can kind of like take some of those really strong volt switches if you turn off the terrain. So Fluttermane being up here does make a ton of sense. Whimsicott makes a lot of sense because usually it's paired with stuff like Mireidon. And so is the Furgiraffe, which is why you can see like they're very, very close. And usually I wouldn't be surprised if most of the Furgiraffe and Whimsicott and Mireidon were on the same exact team. Chiyu picked up a ton. Chiyu has been kind of falling out of favor, but I think the reason Chiyu's picked up is also because of the Whimsicott, Furgiraffe, Mireidon stuff. I think pretty sure those 4 were on the same teams. Like a Terra Ground Chiyu, which we'll try to take a look at if we get a chance. Champao is just really good into a lot of these Pokemon. It helps out the damage for Zamazenta. It's a really good pairing. It's good into this with the Focus Sash. You can just kind of hit it back with the Ice Move and then follow up with a Sucker Punch. So I think Champao is just a good call. And then Pelipper is very, very consistent. Now, day 2 is where things get a little bit funky. Calyrex Ice jumps up to number 1 by a pretty decent margin, right? It was 13%, it's 21% at day 2, which is kind of like a huge increase. This jumps to 2nd, but it's still increased, right? So that's really good. That means that Mireidon's still performing well, even though people are more prepared for it. This jumped up to 3rd, but kind of like a very steady diet of it. 10.5 to 10.9 is not that much of an increase. This dropped a little bit, but it does stay in 4th place. This moves up to 5th place even, and it went up by like a very, very small percentage point, which just shows consistency, right? 8.9 to 909, which means that you did well if you bought this Pokemon at about the average rate. Terrabogos dropped a few points, which is a bit interesting. And I think that may have to do with the Calyrex-Shadow doing well in this tournament, because obviously Terrabogos does not hit this thing at all until you terastallize. Obviously it doesn't hit it back either. But like you can Draining Kiss this thing. You can kind of get like a Nasty Plot in front of it, because if it's stuck in front of Calyrex-Shadow, it can't hit it unless it terastallizes. So it's like you can get a free Nasty Plot off for the most part, and you'll take 1 hit from this thing, especially with like Clefairy on your team, or just with Focus Sash. So you can get off the Nasty Plot, and you can like Terra Fairy. You probably don't want a Terra Fairy, but you can Draining Kiss to get your health back, right? So I think there's ways for this to deal with it more than there's ways for this to deal with this without like popping its Terra immediately. Zacian sneaks into the top 8. This just has to do with like, I think Zacian still being a good Pokemon 1. People I think are leaning more into the offensive Zacian versus like the defensive Terras. And it just has that high ceiling, right? Like 3% behind Zamazenta essentially here. And Groudon just did about as well as it did, and then Kyogre fell out the map hard because 8% to less than 3% is pretty interesting. Raging Bolt jumps into the 2nd place usage, which I always know is going to happen. I tell you guys every video I do one of these now. Raging Bolt's usage is going to basically be under Incineroar's or close to it. No matter what day 1 says, I always expect Raging Bolt to be much, much closer to Incin, because it's probably the 1st or 2nd best Pokemon, non-restricted at least, in the format. Chiyu jumped up really well because the Mireidon team probably did well. We're going to check on that in a minute. Fluttermane stayed about the same. Obviously Raging Bolt increased. Amoonguss went up by a little bit. Whimsicott increased in usage as well, even then it moved up a place. Urshifu Water dropped down a little bit in the standings, and I'm wondering it's because like Raging Bolt, Iron Hands, Mireidon, Double Sun maybe had an issue. Zacian, like a lot of these Pokemon have good matchups with the Urshifu Water, so I wonder if that had anything to do with it. Tana's dropped by 7%. 20% is still really good, but dropping by 7% is not great. Furgiraffe only dropped by like 3%. the Ogerpon increased into the top 8, and then Iron Hands is back. I've been telling people Iron Hands has been good since day one. It's another product of the Mireidon teams now, but I think it's good on teams that are not just Mireidon teams, but it's a product of the Mireidon team that's picked up with Chi-Yu, Iron Hands, Whimsicott, Frigiraffe, Mireidon, and your then your choice of like last Pokemon. So we're gonna go to Cut Explorer. So I want to look at the Calyrex-Shadows that made top 256 because actually I'll show you guys this real quick before I do that. So the ones that scored points, 42 Calyrex-Shadows scored points, 39 Mireidons, 37 Zamazentas, 33 Terrapagos, 29 Calyrex-Shadows and Koraidons, 14 Kyogres, 7 Lunalas and 7 Zacians scored points. 250 top 256 points in this tournament. 5 Groudons, and these are not in a Ho-Oh, and a bunch of other relevant restricted as far as the meta is concerned right now. Good Pokemon, but just not very meta relevant. Now the ones that made day 2, 4 Zacian made day 2, and 5 Calyrex-Shadow made day 2 as well. 5 Terrapagos, 6 Koraidon, 6 Zamazenta, 10 Mireidons, and 12 Calyrex. The reason I want to look at the day 2 usage like specifically like this because it kind of gives you a little bit more insight into the how 2 of these 5 Calyrex-Shadows that made day 2 went on to get in top 8, right? Because it just has good matchups into a lot of the other restricted you see here, right? So it has about a 50-50 matchup into Calyrex Ice. Generally, it has the Terra in front of it, so you kind of get a good advantage, right? You get to pop their Terra early, and with Obatishas, you know what that Terra is, so you can prepare for that very, very well. And then you can kind of take a Glacial Lance, especially with like Clefairy in your team, or you can like get a fake out Nasty Plot off, and then all of a sudden they really have the Terra, and even then it kind of doesn't matter because you can do a ton of damage into it. You have a good matchup into the Mireidon because you are simply faster than it, and you can just get damage down on it very, very quickly, especially if you already picked up a special attack boost. If you have the Clefairy or if you have like a Sash or something to take the first Volt Switch, you just have a generally good matchup into Mireidon because you're faster and you can kind of match his damage output. Same goes for the Koraidon. You're faster than Koraidon. Draining Kiss makes it have to Terra in front of you, or you're just going to KO it. And being able to force your opponent to make a defensive play like that when you in an open tissue format where you know what the Terra is just a huge advantage. Zamazenta essentially can't touch this thing, and Zamazenta did very well, right? Zamazenta can't touch Calyrex-Shadow. Calyrex-Shadow can do really good neutral damage into Zamazenta. Terrapagos, again, has to Terra in order to touch your Calyrex-Shadow. So again, like just then look at the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top restrictions from day 2. Calyrex-Shadow makes all of them make like a decision. They all have to make a decision. They all have to make calls against this Pokemon that you don't have to make against them. You can kind of just click your button for the most part. Whereas they have to decide, do I Terra, do I not Terra? Do I switch? Do I try to pivot? Do I eat the hit and then pivot? It's just really, really difficult for people to make those kind of decisions, especially because the Calyrex-Shadows teams that not only had Clefairy, but they had Rillaboom for like terrain. They had like Incineroar. They had like really great support to help also patch these matchups. It's even like good into Zacian. Zacian can like one-shot it back for the most part, and also take any hits that it dish out. But even then, right, you have the Clefairy and you have the Incineroar to drop the attack, so you can kind of have a good matchup into that. And it kind of just beats the restrictions underneath here as well. I think Groudon could be a little bit tough if you have like a lot of speed def investment, but otherwise it beats Lunala pretty handily. Beats Lugia for sure. I don't know how shout out to the guy who made day 2 with Lugia. So yeah, the Calyrex-Shadows here, they went 13 Ghost, 12 Fairy, 2 Ground, and 2 Water. That's the top 2 picks. These are the ones that scored points. Focus Sash on 10 of them, Life Orb on 6 of them, Choice Specs on 4, Covert Cloak on 4, Citrus Berry on 3, and a Ghost type, aka Spell Tag, on 2. So we know Ghost Spell Tag made top 8, and we know Cloak made top 8. So I was wondering why people are using Cloak over Clear Amulet, because Clear Amulet stops the same things, right? Stops Snarl, stops Icy Wind, stops Electro Web, but it doesn't stop like Airy Impulse, or just like moves that are not attacks, but that are just pure stat dropping, because Clover Clear stops secondary effect. But I guess 2 reasons that you would use Cloak is 1, after you Terra Fairy with this pivot heavy format with like Instant and Rillaboom, I guess you don't want to get faked out because it does kind of stall your offense. And 2, I guess with that, sometimes what ends up happening is people tend to forget that Covert Cloak blocks all those other stat drops. It's not just a fake out stopper. So if you can get your opponent to waste a turn clicking Snarl or E-Web into your Pokemon, you get a huge advantage. So maybe it's like a mental advantage that you get as well. Ghost is to be expected on a lot. Fairies to be expected on a lot. Ground is probably picked up because people wanted to enter into the Mireidon matchup to stop it from Volt switching, and you could just kind of just hit it and you get stuck on the field. Water is just a defensive Terra. And obviously they're all going to just be as one. Round 10, 5 of them. The fairy ones and the ghost ones tend to outclass everyone else. Makes sense. And the top 8, they were both fairy. So fairy is probably just the best Terra for it generally. Ghost being a moderate second place. What other ones do I want to look at as far as the top 256 for this tournament? Oh, I guess we can look at the day 2 usage for this stuff really quick just to see if anything pops out. So Iron Hands with 8 of them in day 2. Actually these 6, yeah, Chiyu being 4th is crazy, actually insane. Oh, you know what, that's what we can look at, because you can see their partners. So this is the list of like the, so yeah, nothing. Oh, Smirgle, yeah, Goodra, Hisui, no, we're not gonna spend time on Goodra. That did not do well. Annihilate, Ditto. I want to look at the partners for Mireidon really quick for the ones that scored points. So the most common, Whimsicott, like I mentioned, for a Giraffe, Chiyu, Iron Hands. Right, so those 4 are the most common partners right now. And then in the 5th slot, you can kind of do what you want. So some teams have Blood Moon to have a Trick Room mode on that team. Some have Incineroar, so that Incineroar can just be like a great, obviously it could just be Incineroar. Some have Ogerpon for redirection and Sturdy. Some have Bundle for the Quark Drive boost. Some have Landorus because Landorus is good into the mirror. Some have Tornadus because Tornadus is also good into the mirror, where you replace like the Whimsicott and you get the Tailwind off, or you get the Bleakwind Storm off with your Sash. You get the Bleakwind Storm off into their Whimsicott to get the damage down, and then you can like Tailwind the next turn, because most of these Whimsicott are carrying Encore, not Taunt. So because you don't have to worry about getting taunted, you can Bleakwind turn 1, eat the hit with your Sash, and then like you can Tailwind the next turn to stagger your Tailwind, which is a good option. Chien-Pao is interesting. I wouldn't expect to see Chien-Pao here. Ditto here probably makes sense. People probably using the team that Aaron Trailer used. Annihilate is interesting. Yeah, the rest of these are kind of not super relevant. So these are basically people using like a different 6 than that slot, right? Volcarona, because you probably have, it gives you a good matchup in the Zamazenta. Yeah, so that's pretty much what that is. But I just wanted to confirm that what I was saying to you guys with Whimsicott for a draft, Chiyu, Iron Hands, all being a product of them doing well as a product of Mireidon being very strong right now, because they all work on the same team essentially. Any other teams that we want to look at? Oh, you know, let's look at the what you call it, Zacian Crown real quick, because Zacian Crown, let's see what this teammates are. Chien-Pao for damage, Incineroar for support, Rillaboom for support, Chiyu is a special attacker. Kind of Grimmsnarl for screens makes a lot of sense. You see, remember what I said when people were leading into the offense of it? So Fairy Terra and Stellar Terra, both are offensive terras for this. One grass, not as people have been using a lot of grass and like water and stuff. Fire for the burns makes sense. Grass for the sleep. Ground for the Mireidon. In round 10, which is essentially like the first round of day 2, all of them fell out except for Stellar, Fairy, and Ground. And then the top 8 was the Fairy. So yeah, actually what we could do, we can go look at the top 8 now. Let's look at the top 8 teams. So we got the top 8 here. And what I want to point out first, right? I have 2 Calyrex Ice, 2 Calyrex Shadows, 1 Zacian, piloted by Keon Campbell. With the Umbreon. Ooh, shout out to Umbreon. We're gonna look at that in a minute. We have 2 Koraidons, because Koraidon's just a really strong Pokemon. They were in the exact same team, Colin Hire and Rajan Ball, and both made 6th and 7th place. That means they, whatever meta call they made here was the right one, because, well, the right one for doing well, but obviously not the right one for winning. 3 Calyrex Ice, actually. Calyrex Ice has been doing really well. I can't remember if it's won one of the regional events, but it's been doing great in all of them. And look at that, Goldengo. Always the Goldengo somehow making it into top 8. But no Terapagos in the top 8 at all. No, what's it called? No Zamazentas. No Mireidons. No Kyogres, obviously. That's interesting. So why is that? Maybe because they have bad matchups and stuff that did make top 8. Like Terapagos struggles against like all these Pokemon, I guess, because it just can't hit them for enough damage. Earth Power is cool, but like Collision Course just kind of nukes that thing. A couple Glacial Lances also gets rid of it. Terra Storm just doesn't do like enough damage into this Pokemon because it's just so bulky. And you don't need the Terra in front of Terapagos either, right? Zacian also resists normal and hits it for really good damage with Behemoth Blade. Even some of his partners like Comfy can't take a Behemoth Blade. Again, it has the Terra to hit this, so you get off like free nasty plots, then you can just like Draining Kiss it down. Yeah, so it makes sense, right? It just doesn't do well into these restricted Pokemon. It doesn't do great into stuff like Iron Hands, ditto. It doesn't do enough damage to Clefairy. If you have something like a Covert Cloak on it to stop Instant and Rilla from just board controlling it, then you don't have like any damage boosting or any recovery. And if you do have those items, then you kind of get board controlled heavily by, if you have choice specs, you get board controlled by these two. And not to mention, like, you get, with choice specs, you have to make a decision on what move you lock into. So if you lock into like Terra Starstorm, and they have Wide Guard, you're kind of just cooked. If you don't have Terra, you lock into Terra Starstorm and they have a Ghost type, you're cooked. If you lock into Earth Power and they have a Flying or Grass type, you're cooked. So it's it makes sense that it's not here, I guess, based on what I've seen. But also, I don't know if that's a good thing, because it kind of gives a lot of credence to the idea that single restrictors are matchup roulette, something that we all talked about at the very beginning of the format. So it just depends on the matchups you pull, and if you pull the wrong ones, you're just not gonna do well, even with a Pokemon that's obviously shown itself to be strong. Zamazenta is not great into Mireidon and Calyrex-Shadow, right? So if you pull out of those, your tournament run's not gonna go well, even though Zamazenta is great. You just can't touch this Pokemon here, and Mireidon just does so much damage to you, and it's faster, so it can hit you at +1 defense before you get up the Iron defense, right? So it just makes sense. Who else is not here? Kyogre is not here, but it just kind of fell off in general, maybe because the Koraidons did well and the Groudons did pretty all right. And not only that, but like not only did the Koraidons and the Groudons do decently in this tournament, so you have the opposing weather, but with Iron Hands being a heavily used day 2 Pokemon and Raging Bolt just being a heavily used Pokemon as well, that's 2 more things that you have to deal with your Kyogre. Not to mention the Ogerpon Wellsprings did really well in that day 2 as well. So that was kind of the problem we talked about with Kyogre as well, right? That it has a lot of matchup counters that just fit on teams very seamlessly without having to force them on there. So that's probably why Kyogre's not here as well. Which other? Oh yeah, Mireidon. Mireidon's interesting. Mireidon, I'm shocked it's not in the top 8 at all, and I'm not actually sure. It has to be because of the one. It has to be because of the Calyrex-Shadow, and 2, I'd be willing to bet that these Koraidons are of the Jolly variety. You're not gonna be able to see it here. I just want to see like their moves: Flame Charge, Collision Course, Protect, and I want to see Rajan is probably the same thing then, right? Flame Charge, Collision Course, Protect. Yeah. So whether they're Adamant or Jolly probably doesn't matter as much because they have the Flame Charge, but I guess getting up a Flame Charge, so you're always gonna have that +1 speed advantage over Mireidon. And then if you're Jolly into all the modest Mireidons out there, then you have like a really, really good like advantage, right? And then on top of that, being able to have it like stuck on the field where it has to click like Volt Switch in order to get off the field makes it a little bit more predictable to play against like Mireidon, or just everything, right? Gothitail is really strong into a lot of teams that like need to be able to move their Pokemon around. I think Gothitail is actually really good call. Obviously he made 2 top 8s, right? So shout out to them. But yeah, even that's not enough to just derail Mireidon altogether though, right? Because obviously it made day 2. I'm just wondering why it didn't top 8 at all. Is it because of all the Rillabooms and Raging Bolts? Kind of has to be then, right? Oh, you know what happened too? They probably just like ran into each other, would be my guess, right? Can we look at the stats here? Where's the top day 2 stuff? How many of them made day 2 for the restricted? So like 10 of them made day 2. 39 of them scored points, 10 of them made day 2. And when we looked at the teammate chart, they did really well into each other. They did they had a lot of the same teammates, and those teammates do well into the mirror, right? Like Terra Ground GU. So it kind of just makes sense that they kind of probably just like essentially team killed each other, probably just blew up each other with those Terra Grounds. Landorus is in day 2 a decent amount, which is a poor matchup for it. Yeah, so I think just also the Clefairies is not a good matchup for it because the Redirects Draco, and again, it makes it predictable because that means now you know for sure you have to click one of the electric moves. You kind of just play around that. So that kind of makes sense. Let me know what you guys think of this top 8. What's the most surprising absence from top 8 to you? Is it Mireidon? Is it Terapagos? Is it Kyogre? Is it Zamazenta? Probably isn't Groudon, but you can say if it is. Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, that's the tournament. That's the video. So subscribe if you're new, click like for your boy, become a member if you are so inclined, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Peace.